So we continue with the Wizard of Oz series, the metaphysical interpretation of the Wizard of Oz. And we're basing it on that metaphysics and the science of mind, philosophy, spirituality as well. And these are the teachings that are found in that classic movie, The Wizard of Oz. And because there are so many spiritual lessons, we're going to break them down and we're going to get right into it today because we have 4 really powerful, important spiritual lessons to learn today. First we learn, got my slippers on, first we learn of the slippers. The first time when we watch that movie, we learn of those slippers when the house comes crashing down in Munchkinland and lands on and kills the wicked witch of the East. Remember that?
Yeah.
The Munchkins are thrilled, and they're so happy, and they're even more thrilled when they learn that Dorothy isn't a witch. Just remember, they thought she was a new witch, because that wicked witch of the East was not very kind to them. But then their joy was quickly dissipated when the deceased witch's sister, the wicked witch of the West, appears on the scene. And she was even meaner than her sister. And she threatens to drop a house on Dorothy. And then Glinda, the good witch of the North, remember Glinda? She's my favorite. She had previously arrived in probably the coolest vehicle ever. That big pink bubble. And then, so Glinda appears and diverts her attention to pointing out that ruby slippers that were still on that witch that was laying under the house with the striped stockings on. And when the wicked witch of the West tries to take those slippers off, what happens?
Hand burns.
Those little red stockings roll up and go underneath the house. And where did the slippers then appear next?
Dorothy's.
On her feet. Exactly, they're on Dorothy's feet. And she has the ruby red slippers on her feet. So Glinda quickly points out where they are and says to the wicked witch of the West, and there they'll stay. I can't really do it. But the wicked witch of the West, of course, is irate and says, I am the only one who knows how to use them, and they are of no use to you. That's what she says to Dorothy.
You do that good.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for joining us. Just walked in the room. Okay. So here we go. So Glinda says, keep tight inside them. Their magic must be wonderful, or she wouldn't want them so much. And so when Glinda says this to Dorothy, metaphysically, she is saying to her that never forget that the divine spark is always alive within you. And nobody can take that away unless you let them. Right? That divine spark of greatness is in each and every one of us, whether we have realized it or not. All the while, Dorothy is standing dumbfounded over the entire scene. She just came from Kansas, not even beginning to comprehend what's going on here, and oblivious to the power in which she is standing, not on which she is standing, but in which, those ruby red slippers. And sometimes that's a little bit like us in life. We're not even aware that we're standing in our divine spark, this divinity and this greatness that's within each and every one of us. No one's left out, by the way. You might think you are, but you're not. Every single person, animal, object, life, every aspect of life is filled with this inner spark, this divinity. So that's going to be the beginning of our lesson number 1 then. We are filled with the divine spark. we talk about that. And that is the spark of God itself within us, this divine energy that we call God. And we are immersed in it. We stand in the power of good all the time. But we must remember, a power of greatness. We're often like the fish swimming in the ocean, right? We're like these humans swimming in the substance. We don't know, like the fish don't know that's water. We don't know that the power of good is all around us, within us, and really is our God spark. It is there all of the time. Each and every person has been made of this radiant light. And it's just like the ruby red slippers, which are made of rare and precious jewels that are a radiant symbol. They're a radiant symbol of our inner spark of life. And I'm going to keep saying that over. That's our first spiritual lesson. And I want to say it again because it's the crux. This is the crux of everything today. These slippers are a radiant symbol of our inner spark. That inner spark of God that is alive forever. It cannot die. It lives forever. It is eternal. It is eternal. And it's filled with infinite potential. There's no limit. There's no time frame. There's no age frame. None of that is in that spark. It doesn't even know what that is. You are, each one is empowered with the infinite potential for greatness. Each and every one of us. And we have the free will to discover that divine spark. And that free will comes out of our awareness. First, we have to wake up and become aware that there is something within us that is greater than all the circumstances and all the people and all the other stuff in our life. There is something, once we become aware of that, really aware of that, then we can make a conscious choice. You cannot make a conscious choice until you become aware that you have a God self. And that God self is your inner spark. So a few years ago, I went, many times I heard Reverend Dr. Michael Bernard Beckwith speak. And it was at the Mind, Spirit, Body Expo. And he said something that was really interesting. He said there is a divine presence that does not recognize the absence of good. This divine presence within each and every one of us doesn't know about lack. It doesn't know about limitation. It doesn't know about judgment. So each one and every one, as your God spark comes alive within you, that essence of a radiant, sparkly divinity, the truth of who we are, it can only be activated through the waking up. The awareness, coming to a point where we can actually really know, not just say, there is a God self within me. And that God self does not know failure. That God self does not know addiction. That God self does not know anything except for the radiant beauty it is. And so when we get to that awareness point, that's when we have the power to make a really beautiful conscious choice in our lives. Ernest Holmes wrote this in Science of Mind. While we do not have the ability to destroy the divine idea of ourselves, we do have the ability to deface it, to make it appear discordant. So that's the big spiritual lesson for number one. There's a divine spark within each and every one of us. So what happens next, though? So what happens next is Glinda soon disappears in her pink bubble. She just disappears off, right? And she leaves Dorothy to her own to figure things out. And that leads us into our big spiritual lesson number two. And Holmes says it this way in Science of Mind. In studying the degree of our evolution, it seems certain that it was necessary from the time we were brought to a point of self-choice that we be let alone to discover our true nature. We are empowered with the attributes of self-choice choice and free will. So we must be allowed to make this great discovery for ourselves. Nobody's going to give it to you. We have to become aware of it in order for it to come forth in our lives, because otherwise it's just covered over. And it's even more than that. I'll get into that later. He also wrote, the law has evolved, the divine law, has evolved to a point of individuality and must now let us alone to discover the secret of life for ourselves. He didn't say left alone. He said let alone. You are never, ever, ever left alone. Sometimes it feels that way. It's not true. That's a fallacy. And there's a power and infinite law that stand ready and waiting to respond to us. Remember that law that gives us back? This is the law of attraction. It's how it works. What we think and feel goes into this law automatically, either consciously or by default. So when we're thinking like ill of ourselves, we're manifesting more of that. We're manifesting more of that. So we want to keep that spark alive within us and realize the power we really have. We really have it. And the minute that you take one step toward God, God comes running to fill up your life. That's the way it works. The minute we start to crack whatever we've covered up that spark with, it's like all the beauty and all the love and all the power that we could never imagine, but it's there and it fills us. It fills us. We are not left alone, ever, because we cannot be separated from that divine spark. It's impossible in our teachings, and we believe in the oneness of all life. So it can't be separate. It cannot be. A power, this is a power for good, a power for greatness, in which we are immersed and in which we stand. And that goes right back to spiritual lesson number 1. We are a spark of divinity. We have a God spark within us. So let's look at the wicked witch of the West for a moment. She was certainly doused, defiled, and she had covered up her inner spark, hadn't she? She was completely in the darkness, long before Dorothy arrived in Oz. So she's been around this whole time. She wants the slippers, not so that she can ignite her inner spark, but so that she has more power. And we're not talking about divine power. We're talking about human power. And that's the power to manipulate people, to try to control people. You know, that kind of power. That's what she wants the slippers for. So when we have lost touch with our truth, the truth of who we are, our dreams, our greatness. Remember you're a little kid and you had all those great dreams? When we lose it somewhere along the line, if it's not encouraged, if we don't know, we cover it up. We start learning behavior to protect our little selves, or our big selves even. And now it's time to uncover it if we haven't done it already. So we have not kept from childhood on our ruby red slippers on. We've not kept that light burning. But the cool thing is that we can't truly extinguish it. We can cover it up, we can deface it, we can do all kinds of things and not recognize it and just go like a zombie through life, or we can wake up. And when we wake up, it's the greatest gift we could ever give to ourselves. That's the truth. But when the wicked witch of the West reaches for those ruby slippers, sparks fly off of them, giving that green-skinned witch a shock. And she said, "Fool that I am! I should have remembered. Those slippers will never come off. As long as you are alive, my pretty. I have her down. That's not so good. I'm trying to do Glinda, all right? There are many people that might want to extinguish your inner spark. You know, you tell your dreams to those people and they're going to shoot them right down. Oh, you can't do that. You're not possible. You're not capable. It's never been done before. And that's why a lot of New Thought writers say, do not tell anyone what your dreams are. And here you can tell people because they'll encourage you. They're going to want you to fulfill and manifest your dreams, your desires. And sometimes it's that committee that resides in your head, which could be the worst enemy. Well, you're not good enough. No, you think you're going to do that? It's like I can hear her voice. That's the committee. That's the committee in my head right now. Get out of here, right? But they can never get those ruby red slippers unless you let them. Unless you let them. You stand in your truth no matter what. No matter what. You just stand in that. And how many times have you let someone else or yourself talk you out of a dream? Talking about, that's diminishing your inner spark. When you're talked out of something you're being called to do. So it really has taken me and it continues, like my entire life to get to the point where I am right now, where I can recognize this is true. This inner spark is alive. I feel it. I know it. It makes me feel lighter. It makes the correct decisions when I listen to, and I always go to my heart. That's where I feel like it is. It's everywhere. But I mean, these bodies are inside of our inner spark, by the way. But I just feel it in my heart that this is the inner spark. And nobody, no way is going to diminish it any longer. We have to refuse to allow people to do that. And we have to refuse to allow ourselves to do that. And then we get to choose. Because sometimes we think, I don't have any gifts. What are you talking about? I remember years ago. What gifts are you talking about? I don't have any gifts. What gifts do I have? And everybody around me said, well, you got this. And you got, I don't have any of those gifts. So we have to step into owning, little by little, the beauty that we are. We all have gifts. You know, every single person has something that they are called to be, to do, and to act in this world, to ignite our radiant self. And we might not be aware of that divine spark. And if we're not, then do what I did. Ask for divine guidance. Ask to be shown the way. Just ask. Ask and it is given, right? Ask and you shall receive. It's the way it works. That's the law of this divine energy. It gives back because we're creative beings. We're creating our lives. We must consciously create our lives. Or we can create them through default, which we will do also, and sometimes that shows up as not what we want in life, because it's our default setting that is just operating, because we're always creating. Just by thinking and breathing and feeling, we are creating. So that leads us finally to lesson number 4. After Dorothy throws the bucket of water at the Wicked Witch, remember that? She didn't mean to, but she accidentally liquidated her. Literally. And then everyone forgets about the ruby slippers. They're all forgotten about it. All the rest of the things that take place in the movie, nobody even questions the ruby slippers until the Wizard of Oz gets in that basket and takes off, leaving Dorothy behind. And that's when the lovely Glinda floats in yet again. She floats in and just at the right time says, you had the power all along to go back to Kansas. And that's when the Scarecrow said, well, why didn't you tell her before? Failing to use his divine intelligence at that point. Because she wouldn't have believed me, explains Glinda. Glinda knew. She knew that one of the biggest spiritual lessons of all, one that Buddha taught, one that Jesus taught, one that all the great spiritual truths in every religion always teach, this one absolute. It is done unto you as you believe. You have to believe it. Nobody can tell it to you because you won't believe it. So you yourself, you have to believe in yourself. And it's a huge lesson for us to move into. So I want to recap. I want to recap the 4 lessons for this morning so that we can remember our inner spark. And the first one is that to remember that we have this indwelling spark of greatness, of great good within us. And then lesson number 2 is that we are not left alone. We're not left alone. We're let alone. We must discover it for ourselves. And that brings us to 3. There may be people, including the committee that resides in your head, who try to distinguish your inner spark. And it can't be done. It can't be done. It cannot be done unless you let them, and even then it's temporary. Because when you wake up, when you become aware, you then go back in alignment with it. And then the big lesson is it is done unto you as you believe. What are you believing about yourself? What are you believing about your life? Because that's what you're creating. So now it's the time. It is absolutely the time to wake up out of our sleep. The belief, and to really move out of that belief that was separate from divinity. We are not separate from divinity ever, ever, ever. It's a dream that we must wake up for if we want to taste the waters of reality, real reality. If we want to express and believe in ourselves and do what we feel our hearts tell us to do, no matter what anyone else says, no matter what your own mind says, do it anyway. I ignore my thinking a lot. I have to. Really, seriously. Just not even pay attention to it. Like, because you know it's not your true self, it's your limited self that is speaking to you. And your true self is unlimited. It's unlimited. And this life, this evolution, this waking up is a process of our evolution, a little here and a little there, until the whole eye, the inner eye, is open. And we see that life is neither separate from God nor different from good. We deserve all the good that we can believe, all the good that we can embody. We deserve all of it, all of it. God sees and knows only perfection. And we are creations of that perfections. We are the radiant light of the great creative being. And we shine that light forever. When we leave these bodies just disintegrate, but that light is eternal. That's the part that I love the best, is that to know that that eternal part of each and every one of us cannot die. It's always, and the more we shine it here, the more we shine it everywhere. So then for all of us, is to hold tight to those ruby red slippers. Let them symbolize that inner spark. And think of yourself as only God knows you. His beloved child, His perfect creation. Because that's what we, each and every one of us is. And we have infinite potential available to us all of the time. We really do, and we are. We truly are. radiant beings of light, but we must remember that. So however we get to that, let's just hold tight to that knowing, to those ruby red slippers, and to that knowing that we really are a spark and a creation of infinite possibilities. Let's not limit ourselves any longer. Let's just believe. Just believe. It is done unto you as you believe. Believe that you're a child of the divine. Believe that you have infinite potential. And that will be your manifestation. That's what you will be living. And so it is.